who is going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Well, this is a great privilege to have the speaker here today. You don't need an earthquake to replan a downtown, but it might be helpful. I think that for a planner's dream is, to have a blank slate to start. Well, following an earthquake's not exactly a blank slate, but you probably have more freedom, but you also have a lot more constraints. And for one thing, you got a lot of debris to deal with. So Charles E.D. Charlie was the project manager for Vision Santa Cruz, which was the reconstruction of Santa Cruz after the Loma Prieta earthquake. Has actually a long history of planning. After Santa Cruz, he was a planner in one of my favorite towns, Watsonville. Then he worked for UC Santa Cruz, where he actually graduated from. He is a banana slug. He was director of campus and community planning for UC Santa Cruz, and I guess there are a lot of off-campus properties that involved. I didn't know that before. Of course, one of our favorite things is he was very active also in a lot of civic affairs. He was president of the Chamber of Commerce of Santa Cruz. He was vice president of the Pajaro Valley Performing Arts Association. He was chair of Leadership Santa Cruz. So it's quite a variety, and the list goes on and on. He did get an environmental planning degree at UC Santa Cruz. He has a master in journalism from Berkeley. I'm not sure that fits with planning, but he can tell us about that. I guess you have to write good plans. And he did start a PhD program at the University of Texas. We used to call that everything but the dissertation. ABD. Yeah. He lives in Santa Cruz. He and his wife raised 4 kids. It's a pleasure to welcome Charlie.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be reminded who I am once in a while. I wake up and go, who am I? Anyway, I'm real happy to be here, and I think I'm really happy about the fact that you are here, and because you being here represents something that's probably the most important thing of all the lessons I'm going to convey to you today about planning, which is that you have to be committed to the place. You have to have a stake in it. You have to have so it has to be meaningful to you. And you wouldn't be here unless this downtown in particular, was important to you. And I can tell you from experience that in Santa Cruz, there were a lot of decisions that were made by property owners and business owners that wouldn't have passed the cost-benefit analysis at Stanford Business School, for example. But they did it because their heart was in it. So that's, a shout out to you all. I've been doing planning a lot of years, and I didn't get into this disaster recovery business intentionally. I feel like I somehow ended up being like Forrest Gump. I just started showing up places and things happened. I came back from Texas. I was working on a PhD dissertation. I was working for the city of Santa Cruz, working on a general plan. I was working with downtown businesses. All of a sudden, the earthquake hit in 1989. And then I had no role in the emergency response, except a week later I was appointed incident commander, and they gave me one of those orange vests and you walk around and, it's weird. Anyway, but it was because I had a relationship with the downtown property owners and businesses prior, and it was a very stressful time, and there was they needed somebody that they had some trust or experience with. And so I ended up being that, and then, like I was saying, the project manager for the recovery planning. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. And I've been talking about disaster recovery a lot over the years because I got invited to keep speaking at these different things. And the funny thing happened, according back to the Forrest Gump thing, is that, well, like I went down to Pasadena and I gave a talk there, and about a week later Northridge hit. And I went up to Alaska one November and was speaking in Anchorage at this conference, and yeah, about 2 weeks later, whatever it was, they had a small earthquake. It gets worse. And then I was speaking at the National Hurricane Conference in New Orleans. And this is a thankless task. I'm speaking to emergency managers and people like that. Mostly they're commiserating. They're crying in their beer because nobody pays attention to them. So I'm down there in New Orleans, I'm giving this talk, and these guys, engineers, are telling me, say, this place is going to be hosed if we ever have a hurricane because those levees are going to break. Anyway, sure enough, we all know what happened next. And then I was going to, I was part of an American delegation going to Japan for a U.S.-Japan conference on urban earthquake disaster reduction, and it was there was a delegation from Japan, delegation from the United States. I was part of the 30 Americans or whatever it was. We had a range of professions and structural engineers and planners and architects and so on, emergency managers. Well, we arrived in Osaka on Monday, January 16th, 1995. Osaka is right around the bay from Kobe. January 17th, we got shook out of bed, the Kobe earthquake hit. So then I spent, the whole week, we jumped the conference and I was in on that and then went back several times. But anyway, I don't want to scare you more than I already have. But I know it's getting real quiet in here all of a sudden. But so I used to talk to folks about, people want to know, well, how can we prepare for disaster, which is a good thing to think about, and how do we do that? But more and more, since I've been, going to these various things and talking to the people in New Orleans after Katrina and going back to Japan and so on, I've kind of reversed this, and I've reached the point now where I think that there's something about recovery planning that reveals truth about planning, and that instead of necessarily looking at disaster recovery as a way to think about what if we have a disaster, you can look at disaster recovery and planning and say, what does it reveal about the fundamental important things with planning? And that's where I'm coming from today, and that's what I'm hoping we get out of this, is that at the end of this talk, and that I'll have given you some ideas and thoughts that will help you understand the holistic nature of planning for downtown. You don't have, fortunately, you're not having to recover from a disaster, because I don't really recommend that as a way to go. Although I will tell you, prior to the earthquake, I remember walking around to downtown Santa Cruz with a policeman. He was a friend of mine, and we were lamenting how the downtown could be so much better than it was. And he said, Charlie, nothing will happen. It's going to take an earthquake. So anyway, hardship reveals character in people, they say, and I think disaster recovery, like I said, reveals some truths about planning. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just kind of give you a little snapshot on some of the planning lessons that I've learned being involved in these disaster recoveries. And then I'm going to kind of go into the slides and talk a little bit about the planning process we went through in Santa Cruz, sort of bring it down to a specific place in a specific downtown, and how we got to be successful. And then I'd just like to maybe just have a conversation with you all about what, you know, what's going on here, and how, you know, what can I do to, you know, sort of talk about this with you. So let's start with some lessons. So one of the things that I found very interesting, and it came to me about 10 years ago when I was preparing for a presentation, I said, you know, the thing about a disaster is that it accelerates time. Accelerates time, because what was going on in Santa Cruz was, prior to the earthquake, we had a, you know, perfectly reasonable downtown trundling along, but things were changing. But part of the problem in planning is that things are changing, but people don't like change. And they love new things, but they don't like change. So we're always dealing with human nature. And our planning in Santa Cruz prior to the earthquake was basically consisted of don't change a thing. But underneath that, things were changing. Market conditions were changing. Basically, and I'll go into that a little more later, but the trend was sort of downhill or status quo. You know, it was like, okay, we're surviving. Anyway, I'll get into some of the details of that, but the point is that the earthquake hit, and all of what was going to happen over the next 20 years took place in, you know, 17 seconds. And suddenly the future has arrived. So think of it this way. A lot of times when you do planning, think about your car. You're driving down the road, you're looking out the windshield, you're looking at what's in front of you, you're looking at the present, you're aware of everything, you've got a little rear view mirror, and you're kind of looking back and, you know, making sure you're not getting run over by a motorcycle. But in planning, it's almost like we reverse that sometimes. I've seen a lot of planning done where